Welcome to the 11th edition of AISS 2023. Uh, this is the first session. It's a masterclass on simulated data protection strategy, safeguarding data and privacy across the lifecycle. And we have Deloitte conducting this masterclass. This whole new regime, data protection regime, regulation, compliances, and obviously the increasing ransomware attacks. We are all concerned about how data will be protected across the life cycle. It's not just personal data, but also the non-personal data. And today's workshop, today's masterclass, we will delve into the different strategies for data protection. And we have Manish Sehgal, Partner Risk Advisory from Deloitte, and Gaurav Gupta, Director Risk Advisory Deloitte India, to conduct this masterclass. Thank you so much, Manish and Gaurav. Over to you.
Thank you. Very good morning, all. Hope I'm audible. Great. Thank you, Prasad, DSCI and ASCOM team for having us here to talk about our thoughts as to what it takes to have a right strategy when it comes to protect the data across its life cycle. This topic has become obviously more pertinent considering the recent regulatory updates that we have seen in our own geography. But that would have given a push largely towards the personal data. But as Prasad said, that when you talk about data protection, it's just not about privacy. It's something beyond as well. Actually, our experience says that most of the enterprises talk about or focus on data protection usually when it's about getting processed. But maybe not that much of an effort and a focus is given when the data starts its journey within an enterprise. The very first pivotal point when data enters an enterprise, either by acquisition of data or maybe by the entry of it. When it starts getting to the cycle of processing, backup, restoration, the focus tends to get a bit more to have the right controls, security, backup, restorations, rights, etc. But the entirety of the life cycle of the data, when it starts from the very first step of entry or acquisition all the way with supposedly a secure erasure, is what we are going to make an attempt over next 90 minutes or so to share our perspective. With that, two points that I would like to share first. Today's session is not focused on a specific technology or a solution or a platform, right? So it is a technology/solution agnostic. We are not here talking about any specific product. Secondly, there will be few survey Mentimeter questions for us to get a sense as to how this topic is being perceived within the community of the people that we have today. And of course, gonna have share the results live up to see us get a sense as to how that has been taken care of. Now, this is how we view an enterprise data lifecycle in its entire construct, right? So, hoping it is visible to all, what we see at the very beginning are the subjects or principals or the individuals like us whose data we are talking about. If we talk from a business, from a customer centricity, employment, partners, offices, etc., both from personal as well as a non-personal data. And non-personal data could be anything which is important to us as an enterprise. It could be an intellectual property data. It could be some research that has been done by the product company, or maybe an upcoming pharmaceutical medicine that is out to be launched in the market. That is all important data that an enterprise may want to secure for themselves. Starting from here, which is about the collection, and that is where our perspective is that based upon our experience, not that significant focus is put while collecting the data. Now, if I talk about the privacy as a concept, the principle of data minimization, if applied, helps us significantly just to ensure that we are collecting the data rightfully and only collecting the data that is required. But if you talk about the non-personal data, the principle may still apply. Why we want to have the data that we may not be even able to use it? Earlier, the philosophies were that let's collect as much as data we can, because in the future we may require it to be used in some of the other capacity. But does it really get used all through in the same tenure, in the same format? I think that's where we may have to start questioning the status quo. Now, what are those strategies principal solutions that we may apply is something we're going to talk in few specific case studies that I'll have request Gaurav to help me with. But if we are not able to apply the data protection strategies right away, then it may not be the right thing to do. And that's the whole focus we are trying to do. So once the collection is done, the life cycle goes through this, the top green layer that you see. Collection, storage, use, transfer, and destroy. This is the complete data life cycle where all the protection is required to be ensured, apart from just a regulatory use. And based upon our experience, we have seen most of the time the storage, the usage, and the transfers become the three critical milestones in the data lifecycle where the protection really starts to get focused upon. As I said, there is a general tendency, let's collect as much as we can, but can we rethink about it? And then towards the end, which is about destruction, is again a point which maybe we all believe as data protection practitioners that is required, but is it really out there? Are we really destroying the data the way it should? Are we really getting the data outside our environment when it is not required, be it coming from a regulatory perspective, from a personal data or privacy data, or even the business data? The focus is not that significant apart from the three intermediate stages, which is about storage, usage, and the transfer. And then finally, the topics or the information that we're talking about, right? It could be financial data, it could be the customer data, health data, employee, intellectual property, biometrics, and so on. Just to represent as to how within an enterprise a data stack looks like. Only takeaway that I would request you to have in this slide is that the collection is going to be beyond just personal data. Do we have the right data protection technologies at the initial stages of collection, getting through the storage, usage, transfers, and finally the destruction across all the parameters? With that, I'll request Mentimeter to be put on the screen. If you can go to the menti.com and use this code, we wish to know if you and your enterprise have already undertaken a data protection journey or you plan to. What do you think are going to be the key triggers for it? Is it the compliance/regulatory push, or the larger maturity of the cyber posture is what is going to be the key driver or has been the key driver for you within an enterprise? Menti.com, the code for ease of it, 17251422. We have about 100 plus people in this room. Let's see how the response goes like. Again, I'll repeat, it's not whether you have a data protection program in your enterprise. Even if you don't, and you believe you're going to start soon in the near future, based upon your environment, ecosystem, management direction, where do you think the trigger would be? Is it a proactive measure of securing and maturing our existing cybersecurity posture, or you believe a compliance and a regulatory push is going to be the real driver for you to do the needful? About 50% of the participants have registered and done it. I'll request others also to share their thoughts. Okay, taking this as a good representation, this is not surprising, because even in our experience, majority of the data protection journeys start with a regulatory push. This has to be done. But what we have seen is that most of the time the regulatory push may be very inclined on the security of the personal data, not so much on the business data. But when this itself gets triggered, it gives a segue for us to talk about the larger data protection strategy within enterprise, which could go personal data plus plus or PII plus plus. The organizations which either are or intending to do this are the ones which are likely to get a segue of saying that irrespective of the compliances, we believe that the data needs to be protected across. And if the compliances come our way, that will be just another requirement for us to address rather than we instigating something purely on a regulatory reason. Also, it is generally seen if this is a driver, this is largely to get into a tick in a box sort of an exercise, which may not be the right or the best thing to do in the current cyber world. And this tends to be more about a cyber enabled or cyber secure enabled operations. And even if you have a regulation today or tomorrow, it becomes another requirement for us to take care of. So I would have been surprised had it been other way, because in our experience, usually this is the driver. But as I said, that we have seen a new pedigree of organizations which start with this to address an immediate requirement, but then because the baseline gets created, they tend to leverage the entire framework environment to expand to the larger PII++, that means the business data or a non-personal data as well. With that, I'm going to request Gaurav to help us take the discussion ahead. And these are not the only two drivers. For the survey and the Mentimeter purpose, we thought of putting two, but there are four or a couple of more that we have based upon our experience. We'll talk about it shortly. Gaurav, over to you.
Thanks, Manish. I'm audible? Okay, thanks. So good morning, everyone. Once again, I'm Gaurav and I work closely with Manish. I'm a National Director for Data Protection Service Line for Deloitte India. Today, before I land up to this slide, I just want to check few more queries. I just have one question before I land up to this slide. As we see in the Mentimeter, right? So compliance and regulatory is the business driver right now, and it's talk of the town. From last 5-6 years, everybody has seen a boom in the data protection domain, specifically when we talk about any compliance, whether it's the HIPAA, PCI, even the ISMS part, and especially the GDPR and the DPDP is now very much active in India. Now, besides regulatory and compliance, considering the results on the screen, what are the other business drivers or even the technical drivers which are holding this particular domain as a key element within the cybersecurity framework? Any guesses? Anyone wants to be a volunteer?
So, based upon your experience, if you believe not compliance is not matured, but there was something else that led you to start with those, happy to hear out. We have our own thoughts, but if there's anything that somebody from the the participants may want to share.
Okay. In the interest of time, let me pull out. So as we speak, there must be someone somewhere within your organization ecosystem is collecting or generating any sensitive data, isn't it? Yes. So what does this mean? That we are in the digital era, and that means that every second there is a data which is getting generated, which can put any organization into legal and financial obligation if it is sensitive or critical for my BAU, right? So that's the first factor. Second, the organization today is in the cloud transition journey, right? And whether the organization is in the midway or might be fully completely into the cloud space. So that means from a financial aspect, there is an overhead TCO, right? That's the second factor. Last, considering the articles which we are going through within this privacy principles, whether it's the GDPR, for example, Article 17 and 19 talks about a request to erase. That means that the organization is liable to erase the data as the data subject approach for erasing is PII, which organization has already collected. So, considering all this, the operating seamless operation is also one of the key criteria or the key requirement today which organization should have. So, coming back to the okay, can you push that slide? Yeah. No, the front one. The life cycle. Yeah, this one. So today's topic is more how the integrated data protection lifecycle management should be executed, or a program should be executed within an organization, having all the three phases. So when I say three phases, I'm dissecting this whole diagram into three parts, which start from data collection and data classification, which is more kind of interrelated to each other. The reason behind, until and unless the organization is not having a well-defined data classification schema, the data discovery angle will never ever get accomplished. in a full-fledged manner or as per the objective decided. Now thereafter, the DLP is something, the other portion, because whatever the output of a data classification, that will be an input to the DLP. So these are interconnected. Now, the second phase is of the data obfuscation, and the last phase is something which Manish was stating about the data eraser or the sanitization part. So as of now, this whole data lifecycle management is segregated into three parts: discovery, classification, and DLP in the first phase, data obfuscation being the second phase, and the third phase is the data eraser and the sanitization as a secure eraser, and or the data minimization. Now, coming about to the next slide, right? We can go to the Mentimeter.
Yeah.
Yeah, Manish. Can we have the code or? Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's over there.
So this is the code, the same Mentimeter site, right? What term is used to describe the technology that places sensitive information with the non-sensitive version, right? We just want to get your thoughts. Is it blanking, masking, whiteouts, retracting, hiding? And if you may relate to the cycle that we described in the last slide, and of course the one that I talked about, this is all about the core where the data is getting processed. Starting with the classification, discovery, getting into the processing part, the obfuscation part, and finally the destruction. That's really the cycle that we're talking about. Within the processing part of it, we just want to gather thoughts if there are any different versions or names for this point. Masking is standing out significantly. Okay, well, 65 people have logged in, rest have not. So maybe it's a almost a close representation. 71 now. Okay, right. Gaurav, this is good enough results.
Yeah. So masking, I think it's a clear.
Yeah, but the gap is significant, right?
Yeah,
The bar, even if the others get through, the idea is still that masking is what most of the us believe is the right name or a technology to represent this ask.
Okay. So okay, so we will go with masking now. So why there is a need of data within data obfuscation, right? And you have lot many other domains, like because the bigger umbrella talks about the cryptographic controls, and if I talk about or if I correlate it from the compliance side of it, I think all must be familiar with this two words: anonymization, pseudonymization. This is a talk of the town nowadays, right? So when we talk about the typical traditional approach of cryptography, the first thing comes is PKI, right? And why the BFSI industry is definitely very promising when it comes to the cryptographic controls, considering the critical financial data or the CHT part of it. Now, how masking took over the encryption, typical traditional public key infrastructure part? Because today, nobody wants that there should be a lag when the transaction is happening. Similarly, the way the control talks about that when needed, the data has to come back from ciphertext to the plain text, right? So these are the typical requirements which the compliance of the regulatory requirement or the obligatories has put in. Now, coming back to masking, earlier it was a static masking in the space, right? Or in the market, everybody talks about the static masking. So what is DDM, which is a new verbiage in the market today? Any guesses? Anyone heard about DDM? Okay. So DDM stands for dynamic data masking. And what exactly it is? It is on the fly. So there is I was leading one third party audit, and people says the auditee was very, very confident when it comes to the cryptographic controls, because there were 3 crown jewel applications which they were managing on behalf of a BFSI based out of Europe. And the moment I landed into the data obfuscation part, my first question was, are you all okay that you are managing as per the client requirement and the data which is landing into the database, that is all encrypted? They said, yes, we have enabled the TDE, that is the transparent data encryption control at my Oracle layer, and I'm all good. The moment I landed over there, there was a small gap over there to understand this control. The reason behind, the moment your application, the data moves from the application layer to your database layer, that means the data got encrypted. That's fine because you are encrypting with the native utility of TDE. But the DBA or the privileged users who you have configured at the database layer, they can easily manage this because the DEC and the MDEC, that is database encryption key, and the master database encryption key lies within the database itself. So there are so many things which person has to think of when they are actually applying these controls. So why masking replace the typical encryption part of it? Reason behind masking never allows anything which is going beyond application layer to the database layer. And DDM is the new technology in the market which puts the masking control at the application layer. So whatever is moving to the database layer, it is all junk or it is a random value. So even a DBA have a glance of it, it is of no use. So that's where masking is something which every organization should to take a call on it. Manish, next.
You may want to use this. There's another Mentimeter that we will have. Also, a word of caution, though it is very implicit. Having the right data protection technology is not a substitute to other requirements for us to mature the overall cyber posture. So having the right roles, having the right identities is nothing to do with the data protection. So I just sort of giving a perspective. Do not have that takeaway that having the right data protection technology is the absolute solution to ensure everything is right. The other requirements still continue to be given the due focus. So what are the different types of DLPs? About 50 of us have logged in. We have a fair representative answer.
I think in this question I don't have to share more insights because everybody is aware of because every organization today, if you talk about DLP is something which is a very critical component when it comes to the data leakage prevention, and these are just like the key modules which a typical DLP should have. Right now, just one question on DLP. Which is more beneficial when it comes to DLP, whether the DLP should be on-prem or in the SaaS, or it's a cloud-based? Any mix, match, anything? SaaS. Oh.
Yeah, you have the plus. This is the next Mentimeter. As per GDPR guidelines, what methods should organizations employ to safeguard personal information? All of above. This is the first choice: physical, organizational measures, and technical measures. It is just to bring focus to a bit of the personal data and the privacy regulatory requirements that we have seen in the recent past. We have the fair representation now.
Yeah. So I think people have already selected the right.
Yeah. It would have been interesting had this question been on DPDPA. How many of us would have chosen the first option of physical security, physical shredding, right? Considering the data itself, the law talks about digital data, but would have been interesting for us to get some answers. It just clicked me. Physical measures of shredding documents and locking the desk drawers. How much of that would have been an option if this question would have been from DPDPA perspective? Okay, let's move. I think we have the right answers. So which of the following are the principles that must be followed when collecting a customer's personal information? Not to collect the personal information indiscriminately. not to deceive or mislead individuals about the purpose of collecting personal information, limit the amount and type of information you collect to what is needed for the identified purposes, and all of above. We didn't keep it regulatory specific, just wanted to get a sense about some best practices as to how we would go about adhering it. As we get the response to it, I'll just share an example. We were conducting a workshop for one of our clients, and the topic was the initial data collection of customers. And though the answer here is right, but I'll just share as to what we experienced in the workshop, right? So we had the business heads of all the functions, and we started to understand how do you collect the customer information, specifically personal information, when you're registering a new customer. And amongst various fields, of course, it was name, address, phone number, the whole laundry list. 3 of the data items really caught our attention. The first one was gender, second was religion, third was date of birth, and fourth was age. And when I asked the executives as to what is the reason for us to understand the gender of the customer, because the services or the product that we provide are gender neutral. So does it matter if Manish Sehgal is a potential customer and Manish Sehgal is male? What if the gender was female? Would you not have onboarded a customer? Secondly, how does religion matter? Because the service and the products that we offer have nothing to do with it. And then finally, when we have date of birth, is age really a requirement or vice versa? Because ultimately both derive the same point. And when we asked this question, pretty much the same response. We had silence in the room, and then one of the senior executives, he just mentioned that, hoping that everybody understands Hindi, Manish, aisa chalta aa raha hai. This is how we have been collecting information about the customers, hoping that sometime, someday we may require. But nobody has really put a thought behind as to why this information is required. Which goes back to the point that we were trying to position in the initial part of this session itself, that data protection requirements are just not about processing. It's putting the right controls and right strategies at the time of the collection, all through the cycle itself. So though here, most of us have agreed for all of above, but then practically we are experiencing situations, maybe those exist in your environment also. Maybe it's a time for us to relook and challenge the status quo, why this is required. If it is required, if we have our product services which are gender specific, it absolutely makes sense. If our products and services are specific to a religion, it absolutely makes sense. But then, has somebody given a thought to it? I think that's the only point we are trying to position, which has nothing to do with technology. It's all about having the right data protection strategies that we want to leverage. Okay, moving on. Does India's Privacy Act PDPA mandate personal data encryption? Yes, no, maybe. Considering we are still at the stage of a bit of shade of grey. So when we were drafting this question within the team, we were also having almost very similar opinion, because we felt that let the rules be out, because that is where the clear direction comes. And few of us felt that rules will never tell you to have encryption. It needs to, if you need to have the best leading reasonable safeguards, encryption become one of those. So just curious, people who have said yes, anybody can share a perspective, please. Can we have a mic for the gentleman?
Can you specify whether it's for the encryption at transit or encryption at the rest?
We didn't go to do level 2.
So,
we just wanted to keep it, at least from this perspective, whether encryption is a mandatory requirement from a DPD perspective.
For the transit, definitely it must, for like the WhatsApp does. For the rest, it depends on how the organization want to handle the encryption at the back end or at the application level.
So it's a choice, it's not a mandate.
At the encryption.
Encryption level, yes.
At the rest level.
At the rest level.
But at the transit level, it has.
It must,
to be,
okay.
It must.
Okay.
In the choice means it's not that you cannot use, you have to use the encryption at the rest also, but what kind of the encryption you want to, that's the choice.
Correct, right. So that we're not getting into. The idea was just to understand the perspective.
Just hold on. Just can you give him the mic? So you just mentioned that data in transit, right? With AES 256-bit encryption. That's the market size for the algo. What about, so I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? You are mentioning about the data in transit which is outside of your perimeter, organization perimeter, right? Or within the organization itself.
So whenever you organization processing data,
Right.
so you are using some operations, right? Whenever the user is interacting with the any system, so whenever it is accessing data, so in that context I'm talking about.
Just. So it's a typical application architecture which I'm drafting. This is a user interface. This goes to the web browser in DMZ. This is your organization, perimeter, firewall, right? This is a DMZ. From DMZ, it is an application server. And here is a typical database. And here you can put a authentication server. That's how. Now, data in transit starts from here. This is a user
So we can
who
say
fetches the
end-to-end.
data.
Yeah.
This is a data in transit. This is a data at rest.
Yes.
Right? So which encryption you are talking about? This one or throughout the cycle?
End to end.
That's what my point is. Thank you.
Great. So these were the few Mentimeter questions just for us to warm up with the whole concept of what we're trying to do. Now we are going to deep dive into 3 use cases. And before that, we want to just give a bit of a perspective, and then
can I just hold you and on the previous question only?
Yeah,
please.
Whether, as you said, it has reasonable security, it has mandated DPDP, but whether it has mandated the encryption as such anywhere, because that's what.
Correct. That's the whole question, right? So
what is that answer when it says mandating encryption? Is it mandated?
No, right. So it's something that rules will have to define is what we are looking at as potential, because my experience says the acts regulation do not tell you the most granular requirements, right? As we said that it is about the intention, what is required, you have to protect, you have to do. But what it takes to it, we have to wait and watch whether the rules are giving that direction or not. So that's the reason I was saying that even before the results were out, even within us as a team, we were having this debate. We wanted to get a general opinion. Are we thinking rightfully or there is something a different answer to it?
The perspective of the DPDP aspect, right? Any regulation today talks about reasonable measures to control.
Absolutely.
That's what they
exactly.
They will not define
exactly.
certainty that encryption is.
Absolutely. Now, what is that reasonable? I think that's where this effort is required, right? So, no, it will say that DLP is reasonable. But if we believe that as a part of the transition cycle, we have to ensure that we are able to keep a watch on what data is going out, coming in, that becomes part of it. So, best practices are built by people like us, right? There is nothing. But then, there's a reason we want to capture this, that do we read DPDP differently or not? So, thanks for clarifying and thanks for writing it up.
So, DPDP typically is largely framework based.
Right, principle.
And
right.
principle based.
Right.
It is not prescriptive from technology perspective. That's good actually.
Exactly.
Whether encryption is enough or not, again, can get into a debate also. But laws should state only one place, I think, consent manager, where they're trying to prescribe a solution. But otherwise, it is largely principle based, framework based,
Exactly.
rather than prescribing specific technologies.
Right. Sure. Thank you.
I come back to the point where you said.
Can we have mic to the Prasad? Can we mic to the lady?
I come back to the point where you said data collection. So that's not the least focus. The purpose of collecting the data defined what reasonable measures you need to apply there, and then across the life cycle of the data, so reasonable depends on the purpose and the type of data that you're collecting.
Yes.
That's
You are absolutely right, ma'am. But at least in our experience, we have not seen that level of thought being put when the collection was done. Maybe now that the DPDP in India is there, the focus will be there to rethink what all personal data we're collecting, and maybe that will also give a segue to the non-personal data also. Otherwise, in general, the practice we have seen, let the data come, we'll see what we want to do with it. Even if it is extravagant, it doesn't matter, right? So, but you're absolutely right. So if there is one takeaway out of this session that I'll request all of you to it, firstly that the focus is not only about the processing part of data, it's the entire value. And what is the data life cycle? From the collection all the way till erasure. These are the critical milestones which we believe need to be protected irrespective of the stage of the data in. That's the only point we're trying to put across.
Thank you.
Okay, please.
Yes, please. Mike.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, I come from BFSI segment.
Okay.
Okay. So we are talking about DPDP encryption for data at rest and data in transit. What about data in process?
Data in use.
Data
right?
in processing.
Yeah.
During processing.
Right. So there are three key categories when we talk about the encryption or the cryptographic controls, and you are rightly quoted. Data in transit, HTTPS, right? Then data at rest, AES 256-bit encryption as per the global standard, and data in use. What exactly? And that's what my first question was. DDM, masking, tokenization. These are the key critical pillars of data obfuscation, which are used when the data is in process stage. That's what we do.
Hello.
Mike, please. Yes. Sorry?
Can we have the mic connected, please? I don't think the mic is operational.
It's Oracle reduction. When we do a TDE and when we say that there should be a reduction.
So TDE is for data at rest. That is a native encryption control of any database, whether it's a SQL, MySQL, Oracle.
No,
right?
you again put a terminology as DDM.
TDE.
No, TDE is one.
And DDM,
dynamic
not
data
TDM. DDM.
DDM, dynamic data masking,
Yeah.
is the same as Oracle reduction, right?
Yeah.
So when you said during processing, how it can be enabled at that?
So, see, DDM should be applicable. So, see, when we talk about the masking, every database also holds a native utility of masking. Agree?
Yeah.
Right? Oracle holds its own service which needs to be enabled for the masking kit. And then it can be a typical masking which happens at the database layer.
Yeah.
What the dynamic data masking is something which has to be integrated at the application layer. What I mean is at the application layer or the application server. Like there are OEMs in the market, right? The API gets connected at the application layer before the data moves into the database. The actual data which is in the plain text get into the ciphertext and moves into the database. So until and unless when the SQL query goes back, the data comes from the database layer back to the application, then only it gets into the UI interface in the plain text. That's how it is.
Okay. Hello.
Hello. Just a query from my side, please. Hello.
Can somebody raise the hand? We can't.
Yeah, this was, sorry, I'm in the corner.
Okay.
I come from Indian Oil, and it's a question regarding, like, as a company, we handle very sensitive information. So we are governed by the Aadhaar Act as well.
Okay.
So we have the license of the AUA, ASA as well.
Okay.
Aadhaar Act very clearly defines how you handle data right from the collection level to the processing and to the storage level.
Okay.
And it mandates the use of data vault.
Okay.
Where tokenization is very a big mandate,
Okay,
right?
so vault, it's a vault based or vault less.
Sorry, come again.
So tokenization has two categories,
Yes.
right? Tokenization can be taken care in two ways. One is vault based, and one is where the seed value goes into the vault, and one is vault less. So what is your mandate?
In our case, I think the application team, they have implemented vault based.
Vault based.
Vault.
Okay.
My query to you is, there is now two acts, DPDP Act and Aadhaar Act. Where DPDP Act talks about reasonable security measures, which has been left upon the organization, because organization, when they conduct business, they will definitely go with certain certifications as well.
Right.
So based upon certifications, the reasonable security measures will be implemented.
Right.
Now my query is Aadhaar Act and DPDP Act. Both of them will be on the same layer, one will supersede the other, or they will act independently, because as an application or as a business, when we execute, we cannot have independent stack. Same business process, we have to comply with both the rules. So how Aadhaar Act, DPDP Act, how they complement, or how they, because Aadhaar Act is very, very granular detail here it has given how to act, how to implement.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. Well, we are not discussing that topic here, but because you are asking, I'll try to give an attempt to it. The question that you are asking of Aadhaar versus DPDP, which one supersedes? It's a similar question that the banks may ask about RBI requirement versus the DPDP, right? So the provision of the Act is there that if there is sectoral-specific requirement that may supersede. However, on a practical scenario, without taking name of the enterprises, wherever such situations are erupting, which of the two requirements are more stringent and more required, they are going with it. Is this the right approach? I may not comment on it because the most stringent requirements, taking as a common denominator, may require you to invest more, right? So, for example, we are talking about the vault requirement. DPDP doesn't talk about it. We just spoke. It's more of a principle-based requirement. But having a vault can help you to secure information. Yes. Is it required from a DPDP perspective? Answer is no. But if you are already having that requirement, you are already superseding the ask of it. Now, which of the two will going to take a precedence? Much clarity is required, hoping that the rules may to an extent answer it out. Also, in general, we have seen that whenever there is a conflict, or I would say an overlapping situation of this kind, the tendency is to take the one which is stringent, right? But again, it talks about taking more cost and resources. Is it the right thing to do? We'll have to experience a few more examples to share about it. Thank you.
Just one small clarification. Somebody asked about data processing. Please do not directly relate data processing means data in use. Data processing has a wider definition, especially from DPDP perspective. It is like storing, collecting, in use, erasure, everything is covered. So the data in use is like, as he said, right? He explained, we gave a good example of communication between application and database, application and database layer. So please keep that in mind. Data processing is a wider definition actually. Absolutely. It involves multiple activities.
Okay, so now what we were discussing in the very first slide about the data lifecycle management, right? Now we are just putting a double click on the three phases what I talked 10 minutes back. The first phase is more onto the collection, more into the data discovery, classification, and the DLP part. Now, if you heard me well, I said that these three domains are interrelated to each other. And here we will try to justify why they are interrelated. Now, if you talk about from a technology drivers, let me start with our key drivers, right? And we have already discussed about these key parameters, what we have actually encountered in the market. And going back to the upper phase of this slide, technology, right? So data classification, as I mentioned, until and unless the organization don't have a very stringent and a very seamless data classification schema, which holds a very straightaway categories as per their BAU, what are the key data identifiers which they need to classify? Until then, we don't have a very full-fledged, as per the expectations, the data discovery around the complete ecosystem. That's one. Now, in my last session, there is a very good quote somebody quoted over on the stage, grab the seat. And I will come back to you why and what exactly that means is. Reason behind today, when the governance layer is getting drafted at the C-suite level or at the corporate level, people generally don't include the business in that. And they generally put a policy around data classification policy. But at the technology layer, when the IT team or the technology team is configuring these platforms on the ground, they generally get into the very generic terms. If it's a PCI, and by the way, every OEM comes with a very well predefined policy packet, right? If it's a PCI, ISMS, HIPAA, just download it and run the show. That's how we have seen in the our experience. But is that the correct or an ideal strategy? Answer is no. Reason behind, until and unless you will not include the business over there, the actual objective of implementing a technology from data classification or discovery or DLP, that will never be fulfilled. Reason behind, I taken one example. For data classification, if I go to similar GDPR for a compliance, and there is a requirement in ISO also for data classification, if I will just go and download the policy package of ISO. I am all done. The internal audit requirement is fulfilled. I am all cleared. Reason behind, if you tomorrow, if you go to the HR and you say, what are the key data identifiers which you want to classify as per the key categories which have been mentioned in my governance policy of data classification? The ideal strategy is something that all the key business functions within your organization should be involved, and the keywords has to be identified, and that's where Deloitte generally steps in. We generally go for that info gathering sessions, conduct the workshops, and get it done so that the actual parameters should be highlighted, configured on the platform, and then it should be integrated with the other platforms. The other scenario which we have observed is that there are multiple functions within the organization, and as per the business requirement, if my client says that I want this data to be classified, I will not take the OEM names over here, but definitely they will implement one or the other. Within an organization, we have a centralized DLP, but we have multiple DLP instances as per the client or the business requirement. But are they integrated? Answer is no. So the DLP will run its own show, data classification is running in silos, and data discovery is something which is manual or automated. If it's automated, then also the results are not something which is as an input to each other. That's how we have seen. Now, if you look at this particular diagram, what we have done is data classification is the first piece where you actually publish what needs to be classified and what are the key data identifiers. Once that's done, we are actually getting into the data discovery for both structured and the unstructured layer, right? What it means. So, can anyone be volunteer and tell me where exactly my unstructured data lies within an enterprise? Yes, please. Yeah. Unstructured layer, I am talking about unstructured data. But what are the key components? If I have to run the discovery show for my unstructured layer, what are my key hit targets where I need to configure? Endpoints? Yeah, endpoint is one. Sorry? Okay. What else? Okay. Yes. SharePoint. What else?
Connected storage drives which are used for general storage.
Exactly. So these are the key components which people generally don't configure when they run the discovery engine, right? And believe me, when I was putting that question of DLP, what are the key modules of a DLP which enterprise should have? People generally leave this data discovery module within DLP. They have endpoint DLP, they have network DLP, they have email DLP, they have a CASB integration and all that stuff. But the moment, because today, if you see in the market, since this DPDPA got active, the immediate requirement, or we are hearing a lot of requirements around data classification and data discovery. And the first question is, do you have any discovery tool within or in-house you have already implemented? Answer is no. The next question is, do you have a DLP? They said, yes, we have a DLP with a tier 1 OEM, but they are not aware of that tier 1 also holds one module for data discovery itself, which supports both structured layer and unstructured layer, right? So these are the key use cases which we generally create, and then we support the client as an advisor how this can be a beneficiary or integrated approach within the data protection program altogether. Now coming to DLP also, the same stuff, OEM predefined policy package which gets downloaded and the DLP runs, and my internal audit finding is get closed. But whether it really helps as an organization, if tomorrow any breach happens, I am all up on my toes to actually identify, or I have a preventive controls around it. Answer is no. Reason behind, within DLP also we have not actually put in the workflows, which is a backbone of a DLP, right? Or even if I go next level, how I have configured my DLP. This is in block mode or monitor mode. The first question itself says lot many things about how you are into DLP. What is the maturity of your DLP program which you have executed in your enterprise? Lot many times we have seen that the DLP is running, it's in monitor phase itself. There is no measures around the block or the blocking the actual data which is sensitive to an enterprise, if that goes out, definitely that will triggers the legal and the financial obligation to the organization. And the last thing is, which is the crux of all this, is the incident management, which is more into the SOC part. But definitely, if the organization doesn't hold a very robust SOC operations center, still they have to do it in silos. And this is something which is missing. If there is a incident also, or the logs or the events are coming as per the incident monitoring, the first question is, what is the SLA for the L1, L2, L3? And the answer generally we generally go and monitor it or evaluate more on a weekly basis, fortnightly basis, or on a monthly basis. And the second question is, what is the closure timeline? Then they say for L1 we generally go for a month, for L2 it can be 6 months, and for L3 we generally it's a good practices. That's it. So these kind of responses we are hearing. But until and unless if the whole story comes here and if we are not monitoring it adequately, tell me what is the purpose of having all this investment? So that's why this is a very, very critical when we are actually investing or deploying this platform within an enterprise, they should be integrated with it.
So often when we talk about data protection programs, again not absolute, but usually we get a response. Manish, we have data protection program. हमारे पास DLP है. That's a practical reality. Great. DLP क्या कर रहा है? Yeah, there are alerts. Now going back to the point Gaurav was saying, the teams may not be aligned to even monitor those alerts or to understand as to what those alerts are. Even if they are, maybe they are not aligned or equipped to understand that if there's an alert, maybe there's a reconfiguration which is required in the DLP platform to ensure that those so-called positives are being taken care of, because that's one of the matrices that enterprises should consider, how accurate and how appropriate DLP triggers are coming. But if you realize what I spoke in last 2 minutes is all about DLP, nothing on the classification discovery part, which we believe are very critical part of your data protection journey to start with. Right? Not even having a classification, what are we trying to protect as a DLP point? And then going back to the example that Gaurav was giving, that there are requirements of erasure as a part of DPDPA, or even if you don't have a requirement of which is mandated, where my data exists, whether personal data or non-personal data, we should have an answer to it. And one of the questions that Gaurav asked, where is usually the unstructured data? We ask this question usually when we talk to enterprises, and then we end up a discussion saying in a fun manner, "Jahan nahi hona chahiye, wahi hota hai," right? You end up getting pay slips and payrolls in a shared service, shared points where it should not be the case. So the practices are different, whereas reality of ensuring the data protection is right. So to bring things together, we strongly recommend and believe that it has to be looked holistically. Most of the time, the technologies are finalized and purchased and deployed, and then the re-engineering is done to figure out what is the right use case. Gaurav and I have been part of engagements, client requirements, where there are existing solutions for almost all of them, or DLP for sure, but then probably it is not justifying the need or what the expectations are. Going back to the point that Gaurav highlighted, in case you didn't hear, I repeat it, a strong integration with the business team is must. Because end of the day, as technology and security professionals, we are trying to ensure that the businesses get the right benefit. Now, what to protect, what not to protect, what to trigger, what not to trigger is not something the technology team can decide on their own. Unfortunately, that's the case. Again, I'm not making an absolute statement. I'm sure there are organizations who are doing it rightfully, but majority of them are still lagging that connect between the businesses and the technology team, even when the configuration of tools and deployments of these kinds are happening. There are multiple use cases, even as a part of the current engagements, where the DRM solutions or the information right management solutions, they do not cover, let's say, the bitmap images, or there is some compatibility issue. Now, the focus is put that the tool is not right? But I think it's the other way around. Did we evaluate the tool properly? Did we have the right use cases that business wanted us to cover as a part of the requirement that should be configured together? There's another example there. One of the platforms were deployed, but then it was something to do with the PIA, the Privacy Impact Assessment. And then when the business teams were completing the assessments, they were still getting the alert saying that the PIA is not complete. And the only reason it was happening, why the platform was triggering those alerts, purely because there was a tick in the platform that the business teams were supposed to check, ensuring that the assessment stand complete and there is no further action required. Because the way the platform was configured, till the time that tick is not there, it will keep on auto-generating it. Now, it was creating a lot of frustration because business teams were saying, we have done everything what is required, then why the hell we are still getting those alerts? And the blame or the focus was put on the technology team that you did not find the right product or did not do the right implementation. Whereas it was purely a disconnect between your technology and the business team because the workflow was not well discussed and understood. It was simply a matter of check. It could be simply a matter of training. But then the whole focus was we didn't get the right product or we didn't get the right solution, whereas it was something else. That technology team did not understand the flow. Of course, the team who was implementing, they did not connect with the business teams, and the business teams did not understand how to use a product per se. So that's where this whole integration becomes important and not to be seen in silos. This is a whole journey that helps to get the larger value chain. Most of the organizations may be here, but then there's always a way to start, get those things lined up, and do the needful all the way to ensure that the incidents, if they're coming, are being monitored carefully.
Yeah.
Back to you.
Thanks, Manish. So this is a typical, we try to portray or draft something more from a functional side of it. This is a bit technical slide, but still the same. I think more or less you guys have already responded on the DLP part. What are the key egress points, endpoint, email, network. Similarly on the database, the classification, right? What are the key areas where we need to classify, right? And what are the storage areas of it? So we have just tried to portray something around it. Then what are the key environments where we need to focus on, whether it's a classification, discovery, and the DLP part. And definitely, this is something that people generally miss out. Either they are managing the DLP in silos, even they have a full-fledged SOC operations, and they don't integrate the DLP platform with their SOC component, whether it's a QRadar or Splunk. Sorry, I'm taking the OEM names. You have any other SOC module as well. But still, this is very critical. In case we have a centralized compliance cockpit, right, where we are managing and monitoring every incident or every event which is getting triggered within my organization, that is the actual requirement today, considering the emerging threat vector. In case we are on our toes and every preventive action or control is already in place, and we are managing the SLAs with L1, L2, and L3, I think that is what the cybersecurity journey is all about. If somebody says that I am all done, my cybersecurity posture is all okay, and I am on top of it, I think then there is some gray area in that statement. Because cybersecurity is a journey. It is never can accomplished, and I can never be on the top of it. So that is where I want to just want to showcase how this needs to be fulfilled.
And just for a clarity, again, it is implicit, but then let's say data classification, right? We are not getting into the discussion as to what the classification should be. Public mapping, private mapping, confidential, sensitive, right? So that's a different discussion altogether. But the idea is that this whole domain of classification is required to start with. Similarly, others. So that will be a different masterclass. Maybe DSCI is organizing it or not, I'm not sure. But just sort of clarifying that there is further deep dive for all of these to be spoken and discussed separately whenever it requires to talk about the integrated data protection lifecycle.
Yeah. Just want to highlight one thing which I was talking earlier, how these are interconnected. Reason behind, if you look at the management console of these two components, this can be managed from the single component. And whatever we are importing the labels to the DLP management server, which is the crux of DLP, this is the output, which is the input to our DLP. If this is not done, definitely your DLP will never ever work in a way which we are expecting. So that's what we are talking about, the metadata and the X headers. This needs to be fetched into the DLP. Until and unless we have not done this exercise, this will not work as per the actual objective of this whole investment. Now, we were talking about data obfuscation, and I think this slide will give another level of insights what actual data obfuscation is talking about. We talk about encryption, which is a traditional approach. We talked about tokenization. I think here the gentleman was talking about tokenization part.
The vault.
So yeah, the vault and the vaultless, and then with the masking, where we're talking about the DDM or the static masking, all about it. But the why this is actually required, and I really want to emphasize again back to this topic. Reason behind this is a new pulse in data protection space, and why there is an emerging need of data masking rather than typical cryptography part. I think I already shared my views, but still, if anyone holds any other query on this slide, more than happy to discuss. Please.
One query we have seen in our business recently, last 1 year, a good adoption of AI/ML, and lot of engines like Hugging Face, Stable Diffusion, so many integrations with API calls and everything. Do you have reference about any experience of clients where you have managed the DLP into that level? Because as of now, they need data for data churning, data prediction, everything. Because recently, few days back, news came where keys were exposed, and when the key is exposed, whatever you pull, keys exposed, everything is exposed, right? So, any experience on that part, please?
Right. So, if you heard me 10 minutes back, right, and that's where I was talking about the deck and the MDEC part, right? It was a realistic scenario where I was doing an audit for my client, and the client was very confident that yes, I am all up. There is nothing, no gray area in my data obfuscation layer, right? And when I just double click on the database, it's an Oracle layer, and the moment I click, because we know that the Oracle database, whatever you are putting a control around, even a masking or even data integrity checks, right? So data integrity is also one of the key components. Sorry, I missed, but I will first answer to your query and then I will shift to data integrity. Now, data masking or whatever the keys you are using to enable these controls, they are stored within the database repository only, right? So what is the ideal strategy? The ideal strategy is using a HSM. You have to export those keys into the HSM.
Problem during the audit and what we face that generally all those models which are cloud based, because they can perform better than on premise.
In cloud, you have a key vault.
Those HSM in the cloud, again we face audit problem that master key is not with you, it's with the provider.
It's with the CSP.
Yes.
It's
so
with the CSP.
so we face a problem again.
Right.
And
Now what you have to do is if your VMs are in the cloud, right? Suppose you have Oracle VM and it's a AWS instance, right? And the data is moving into the AWS. What if I am directly, before the data moves from my premises, I'm encrypting it and storing into the VM. My key is still in on-prem. Make sense? I'm not using CSP's keys. I'm using my own HSM, which is in on-prem in the safe vault. And before the data lands up into the CSP environment, it is already in the ciphertext. Even the data got corrupt in the CSP instance, still I'm safe. Yes or no? Okay. Coming back to the topic.
Just one more thing.
Sorry. Raise your hand. Okay, please.
One more thing. You said rather than storing keys inside the database, probably use HSM. But if you use variant type of key, it will allow you to store on your server as well. So ideally, you need to use key block format rather than variant.
Exactly. So within cryptography, you have different PKCs #11, PKCs #12, right? Formats. And what you are saying, that is also one of the alternative. Rather than putting another investment on HSM and managing it, why if I put a crypto token and put my keys over there, or even I can put it on a server. When you put a server, that is something where you have to put another corrective control reason behind on the root user who has the access on the server, right? So what if I will put a crypto token, put my keys over here and put it in a safe vault? That can be managed, right? But the only thing is that can be only done for the static data. If it's a dynamic data, suppose my crown jewel application, it's a Swift application of a BFSI. It's a true and for. Every microsecond, there's a transaction happening. So the SQL query comes, take the data out, right? At that amount of time, your keys are in use. So what is the performance of the bandwidth? Then only the HSM is required because it's a hash value. It is never a key. And the key can never be come out. Until and unless I drop out the HSM, the key will be destroyed. but it will never be imported back. That is a secure. Okay.
Hi, I just had one thing, while Manish touched upon the privacy impact assessment particularly, uh, I've seen most of the privacy impact assessments are essentially performed by calling in some consultants like you from outside, and then, I mean, you guys, tell what is mandatory and what is not mandatory. From your experience only, I wanted to understand, like, while I think you guys have done, the implementation of this particular Privacy Act per se, on an ongoing basis, if legal or any particular team which is involved in performing the privacy impact assessments, they're not really equipped with kind of transforming the requirements, technically and clearly mandating out as to what is mandatory and what is not mandatory to protect. So, what has your been experience in terms of, I mean, how to kind of overcome this particular challenge, and maybe which particular function within internally should really be responsible for doing these assessments on an ongoing basis.
Okay. You want to take or
Sure. Which function should take? Sir, it's a highly debatable topic. And there is just no single size fits all answer to it. Organizations which are large, they have scale, they have specializations, they may have somebody like a designated privacy officer on a day one. Organization which may not have may start with something else. So in general, we have seen that usually the legal and compliance offices are active to set this up. But when it comes to operations, there is a separate privacy team that usually tends to take it in case there is nothing that exists today. We have not seen legal and compliance teams involved in operations of privacy because that seems a bit of a different conflict per se. But definitely for launch, they do it. The first question that you asked, how are organizations getting themselves equipped for ongoing operational support? Again, there is no straight answer to it, but with our experience, usually whenever a requirement of this kind gets aligned, the teaming is in a manner that we handhold the function to a manner of couple of months that gives them self-capability to start doing it. And over a period of time, they intend to develop their own in-house capacity and a capability to execute it because there's so much that your external consultants can help you with. Having said that, we are also experiencing organizations which believe specifically for privacy and a DPDPA that we are not in a business of privacy. I am in business of oiling and engineering services. I'm in a business of telecom, for example. For me, that's my bread and butter. Privacy is not my bread and butter. Do I really want to invest to make myself capable? Is a call that they're taking. If they intend to, then of course there's a different line of segment. If they don't intend to, they end up leveraging somebody who can help them ongoing operations of privacy. So it's a very fluid answer I'm giving to you because that's what we have seen. But organizations who have been into the privacy journey prior to DPDPA because of their exposure to the European and the Western world, they're relatively better off because they already understand and they may in some capacity have an office that is now getting operationalized for DPDPA as well.
Helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I think we already discussed about it. This is a typical plain vanilla functional architecture of any data obfuscation platform, and that's what we try to showcase. And I think I already drafted over here as well. Now, the last use case is very interesting, and before I start, I just want to exactly ask one very realistic scenario with you guys as well. I think more or less people are sitting over among you guys must be a business verticals or something. But what if today the IT team comes back to you and says that which data or which server or database instance shall I delete because there is another requirement coming out from a new application? Are we confident to share that yes, you can delete this particular instance?
To give a humor to what Gaurav is asking, organizations don't believe that there is end of life cycle of data. That's a reality, right? Again, I'm not making an absolute statement, but I'm telling you 9 out of 10 workshops that we would do, the first question that we would come, Manish, end kya hota hai? Data to rehta hai. That itself is a big question mark for us from a data protection point of view, because that has never been a requirement for us to believe that someday the data needs to go out of your environment. That means it is ending the life cycle, which goes back to the question that if tomorrow technology team comes and asks the business team, can I get rid of this data? The question will be, aisa bhi hota hai, is it really required? Which again has a lot of question mark for us to address. So I just sort of giving a bit of a humor to the point that Gaurav was making.
Or let me put this question from a CISO or a CTO role. They are investing a lot on the cloud journey, right? And there are every data parameter element which is moving to the cloud VMs, it costs to the organization, right? And suppose there are 3 VMs of SQL and with the multiple instances, and like few of among you are the business verticals, and they say, is this data is really required? Because I'm paying from my pocket, right? Whether it's required or not. What is the data which I really need to keep, and what data I can get rid of? And even this is not just the financial obligation. This is more from the legal aspect as well. Because irrespective of that business purpose, which is already fulfilled 3 years back, I'm maintaining that data in my AWS instance. Isn't it? So this is the actual last phase of our data lifecycle management program, where we have to take a call of data minimization or secure data erasure. Considering, coming back to again what I was mentioning earlier, the articles of the compliance or the regulatory requirements, which straight away said that we have to erase the data and we are liable to erase, right? So this is all about that, and we have just talked about on a very high level what are the key measures about, whether it's the physical destruction, cryptography, erasure, whatever. But this is something which we have to take care of. And this is very critical when it comes to the last phase of any data lifecycle management. So we will not go into deep, but we will switch over to the next part. Manish, you want to?
No, you feel free to do it.
Chime in?
That's okay. But the question that Gaurav asked, right? Any guesses what business would have responded when they said that we need the space for a new application requirement? Can we get rid of the data? Any wild guesses? What would have been a response from the business team?
Mike,
you manage it. Yeah. So you take backup, we'll see later. If it is not connected to the production instance, you do it. Almost on similar lines, the response that we got is that you are shortage of space now, buy more space. Which was not the question, right? It's not about space. Space is the cheapest thing right now. I mean, we are not talking about the space. The idea is that do you need that data? But the response, and nothing wrong about it, guys. I mean, I think it's all about the awareness. So there is nothing wrong that the response that the business team member gave, that if you are looking for space, get new space. We'll approve it, we'll fund it, we'll sponsor it. But the question was something else, which got responded saying we get more space. So which is a reflection of what, as a team, we may have to work to even educate our colleagues, our executives, our business leaders to understand that there is something called end of the data life cycle that has to be appreciated. Now, in case any of you have a question, what is that end of the day life cycle? Until when I have to retain it, keep it. This has a legal angle to it, which of course the organizations have to explore internally. We have our own views to it, but until when to store is a point. Ma'am,
So,
I think you were raising, sorry.
The end of data cycle, right? In record retention is subject to it, because, for example, if you're in a financial service industry, you want to keep your returns record 10 years after the contract has ended. So typically there's no end. Talk about government office. They would want to keep data, personal data for pensioners to the next of kin. That's almost 50, 70 years. So where is the end? There's no end.
Sir, I have not read anywhere that the data has to be retained for infinity.
No, it's not for infinity.
Exactly.
Never for infinity. But if you talk about government schemes, जहाँ pensions देते हैं, where
they will continue 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 70. There is something 50, there is something 70. The point I'm not, see, as I said, we are not talking about what is the timeline. We are just trying to position that the topic is data protection life cycle. There is an end to the life cycle. That is the only point as a takeaway that I'm expecting out of you today. There has to be something there. Now, what is that upper limit? A lot of combination will make it happen. You are in a health industry, you're in a finance industry, telecom, regulatory pressure. There is just so much. But then idea is that there is something like an X value that X value is 100, 20, 30, 50 is something that can be figured out with the discussion from the legal teams. Yes, Mohit. Can we have mic for him, please?
I mean, I think it's a very interesting aspect when you come to talk to about an end of data cycle, right? And the gentleman talk about pension. I think we really need to look at and define the protocols based on the sectoral aspects that you brought out, right? You know, which industry are we referring to?
Yeah.
A pension, again, age-wise bracket would define as the when the data is going to end. I think sectoral definition has to be brought in when it comes to data and life cycle, right?
Yeah. And I'm telling you, Mohit, you go and talk to our friends in the law and the legal fraternity, they will have a very different answer to it, right? And also, another point of end of the data life cycle, if you talk from a privacy perspective, I'll give an example because that is what we were discussing with one of our healthcare clients. They wanted to retain the patient data because that helps in the clinical research of a newly identified disease that they want to help the future generations to come. And then they said that, Manish, would you want us to let the data go away? I said, no, absolutely not. That's what I'm trying to say. That, but then if that data element has all the details of the individual patient, which identifies the individuality, do you want to retain that? Is that going to give you any merit? If not, then do you want to leverage few of the masking techniques of letting the half of the data go away, but the critical part of what the disease was all about, what was identified, what led to the cure, what didn't lead to the cure, and all those permitted. I'm not a healthcare expert, but I mean there are ways of doing it, right? So you want to retain the data for the purposes which can be anonymized and doesn't have any legal bearing. Maybe those could be the ways, but absolutely, Mohit, I agree. There has to be a legal and a sectoral connotation that steps into this discussion.
I have a question here.
Ma'am, I totally agree, but I wish that the day comes soon. Absolutely.
Exactly, ma'am. So just want to add what Manish was stating, right? And Manish, I recall that Westwala client. So similar, right? They were into the healthcare industry. They were managing this data for the clinical research. And the moment we double click, they were managing it in the plain vanilla text. Even the client, even he was not in this world itself, but still they were maintaining, right? And the actual way what Manish was stating is the data obfuscation controls, right? If you really want to manage, put it like Mr. X, and this was the diagnosis history, this was the age, and all that stuff. That's one. Now, coming back to your question, have you seen a data protection policy within an enterprise? A full-fledged data protection policy? Yes. Do you have this section about retention?
Ideally should have.
Ideally should. But it is always missing because people generally don't think from this lens whether this data is required or not. So that's what we are suggesting to our clients, that at least there should be a section which talk about the retention. It can be referred to the contractual obligations of your client. It can be correlated with your compliance or the whatever the applicable compliance or regulatory requirements. And basis that, a business can take a final call whether they want to include, how much they want to retain. If yes, what are the key controls they have to implement? Those has to be explicitly mentioned in your data protection policy. That's how.
I have a question here.
Yes.
Table 6 here.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
From a design standpoint, in your opinion, should there be two different teams, one managing data governance and one managing data protection? Forget the tech part of it. Or both have to be the same team, and if they are the same, then will that not lead to some kind of a overlap and conflict?
I think you already answered my question itself. Data governance always has to be separate when it comes to the technology part. Data governance is actually the top layer, the governance part, right? And they are the one who are managing this whole framework of data protection. Technology is somebody who is implementing those controls. So the governance is the driver which actually drives the overall program.
No, so let's say that the implementation, obviously you will lean on your CIO team to do the implementation.
Exactly.
Correct. But will you call that team as data protection, or will you also have another data protection team designing the policies to be implemented on those tools?
So there will be two different heads. One is the governance, which will define the policy, right? Which will actually, there was a question on the legal part also, right? Whether the legal has to be involved or not. So what I stated earlier, grab the seat, right? Whatever the policies you are framing, that has to be well discussed between the legal body, the business, and then finally the governance layer, who will actually draft that policy. And then the implementation starts. That's how.
I just got a heads up. We are running short of time. We are at booth number 49 tomorrow, day after. In case there are any questions from the sessions, one of between me and Gaurav and our colleagues, you will find us there. So booth number 49 is where we can meet you. Gaurav, we need to speed up to conclude the session now.
Okay, so I just have a couple of case studies. What we have actually in realistic scenarios we have encountered. Similar, I think more or less, I have already discussed about all this. That what are the key challenges clients are facing. This is a classic example of DLP and classification configuration, predefined policy of OEM. When we landed up, we observed that there is a massive data breaches. What are happening, and what we concluded with the solution. What was the value delivered? I will just give a 1 sec for you to get a read of it, and then I will.
This is a reflection of what we just spoke as a real-time example. But since we are in short of time, we are just keeping over a text here.
Okay, this is again the typical realistic scenario of that the client reach out for data discovery without knowing whether they have a data classification, what are the key parameters which they want to discover within the structured and unstructured layer, and that's what we provided a solution. Now this is the end. Now just I'm taking 1 more minute of yours. Last Friday I was with my kid in his annual function, right? Annual day function. And the moment my junior was on the stage, many of parents started, got up from the seat and came near to the stage, including myself. Considering we have still, I think there was a photography club in the college days, which I have not fulfilled. So, holding my camera. While coming back from the venue, my junior asked me one question, or 2 questions. One, why all these people were shooting me, irrespective of they are not my fathers. You are the one who should be entitled to. And second, what if they will misuse this data? So I'm very happy that in India also now the DPDPA is there and very much active. People are thinking from that age group as well. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. I hope we did the justice to your 90 minutes. Thank you for being patient listeners and active participants. Thank you so much for having us here.
Thank you so much, Gaurav and Manish. Insightful discussion. We have next session on mastering endpoint security. My colleague,
So on